Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking on a state that historically defines the American experience perhaps more than any other.
Mm.
It's the birthplace of our democracy, the crucible of the Civil War, and now a global nexus of technology and federal power. We are diving deep into the Commonwealth of Virginia.
And when we call it the Commonwealth, it's a very deliberate designation. Virginia is one of only 4 U.S. states to officially use that term.
Right?
It carries forward its revolutionary and colonial administrative structure. It sort of signals a governmental identity rooted in the common good, even if its history suggests that common good was often, very narrowly defined.
It is truly a pivotal crossroads of American history and modernity. If you want a shortcut to understanding the entire foundation of the U.S., the revolutionary spirit, the horrific legacy of slavery, and the overwhelming influence of federal power, you have to start here.
You really do.
So our mission today is to unpack the immense contradictions inherent in Virginia's identity.
We have some really complex source material to navigate, but the mission is clear. We have to try and understand how Virginia can balance its history as the birthplace of U.S. democracy with its history as, the center of American slavery.
And then how its geography fits into all of that.
Exactly. We also need to see how its dramatic geography, from the coastal plains to the Appalachian peaks, influences its modern, polarized economy and politics.
The nicknames alone reflect that historical gravity. It is the Old Dominion.
The oldest nickname.
Yeah, which some historians trace back to King Charles II, recognizing Virginia's loyalty during the English Civil War era. And of course, that's famously the mother of presidents.
8 U.S. presidents born there. It's an incredible statistic.
Yeah.
Including 4 of the first 5, which just cemented its initial political dominance.
And the motto? Sic semper tyrannis.
Thus, always to tyrants. It's featured prominently on the state seal and flag. That's a bold and, often controversial statement.
Especially given who shouted it after assassinating Lincoln.
All right, John Wilkes Booth. But at its core, it reflects Virginia's ingrained revolutionary roots and this deep distrust of concentrated executive power.
That distrust is a structural theme we will definitely return to. So let's set the stage with a snapshot of modern Virginia. It's the 12th largest state by population, exceeding 8.8 million people. The capital is Richmond, and the most populous city is Virginia Beach.
But, those official centers are often overshadowed by what people call the Northern Virginia factor, or NOVI. The sources show that Northern Virginia, the region directly influenced by Washington, D.C., holds over 1/3 of the state's total population. That's really where the political and economic gravity lies today.
Fairfax County alone is the largest subdivision, home to over 1.1 million residents, driving an enormous tech and federal government presence.
And this imbalance creates a constant political and economic tension. You have a wealthy, progressive, densely populated north versus a historically and geographically vast, often poorer, and more conservative remainder of the state.
Understanding that dynamic tension is essential as we dive into how Virginia was forged. To truly understand Virginia, we must look beyond 1607.
Way beyond. Archaeological evidence shows nomadic hunters were using the land around 17,000 years ago, and Darty's Cave was a protected rock shelter as far back as 9,800 years ago. So this is ancient history.
And when the English arrived, they didn't land on an empty shore. By the 1500s, the native population was substantial, reaching an estimated 50,000 people.
And the Algonquian tribes, under increasing pressure from groups like the Seneca to the north, had consolidated their power.
Who was leading that?
That consolidation was led by Wahunsinuckaw, or, as he's better known, Chief Powhatan in the 1570s. By the time Jamestown was established in 1607, Powhatan controlled Seneca over 150 settlements and approximately 15,000 people across the Tidewater region.
So this wasn't just a collection of scattered villages.
No, not at all. It was a sophisticated power structure that immediately clashed with the colonists' need for land.
The name Virginia itself is a piece of this colonial context. It initially applied to the entire Atlantic coast, stretching from present-day South Carolina all the way up to Maine.
Right, famously coined, perhaps, by Walter Raleigh in honor of Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. But there is also a persistent, very intriguing theory that it derived from a Native American phrase, Wingandakoa.
The colonial establishment itself was, shockingly brutal. The London Company established Jamestown in 1607 with ill-prepared settlers who were more focused on finding gold than, agriculture.
And after John Smith left in 1609 following an injury, the colony experienced what's known as the Starving Time. The records are just stark. Over 80% of the first 8,000 settlers died within just 14 years.
80%.
From starvation, disease, and conflict with the Powhatan Confederacy.
It was a disastrous start, yet the colony persisted, and it was because of one thing: tobacco.
Exactly. John Rolfe began commercially cultivating a milder strain of tobacco in 1612, which was hugely popular in Europe. This cash crop provided the economic engine that justified the immense human cost.
And the tobacco boom immediately created a massive demand for labor.
Right. Initially, that was met through the headright system, which gave land to people who imported settlers, including indentured servants. But 1619 marked the tragic pivot point.
When enslaved Africans were first sold in Virginia.
And this is a nuance often missed. Not all Africans arriving initially were immediately subjected to lifelong slavery. Some arrived as indentured servants and could earn their freedom.
But the economic need for a permanent, perpetual labor source quickly drove the legal system to formalize race-based bondage.
And that formalization is seen in landmark legal cases that are just central to the history of race in America. We looked first at John Punch in 1640.
What happened in that case?
Punch, an African indentured servant, ran away with 2 white indentured servants. The white servants had their terms extended, but Punch was sentenced to servitude for life. This was one of the earliest legal distinctions of lifelong servitude based on race.
Wow. And then there's another case, John Kacer.
Even more explicitly, yes, John Kacer in 1655. Kacer was an African man indentured to Anthony Johnson, who was himself a free black landowner. When Kacer claimed his term was up, Johnson claimed Kacer was his slave for life.
And the court sided with Johnson.
A court ruled in Johnson's favor, making Kacer the first person in the English colonies declared a slave for life through civil law. These cases provided the legal basis.
And then the laws followed.
The Jamestown laws followed swiftly to codify this economic reality. By 1661, slavery was defined as race-based. Crucially, in 1662, the law established that the status of the child slave or free fall of the mother.
Partus sequitur ventrum.
Exactly, ensuring the perpetuation of the system. And by 1669, any fatal resistance by an enslaved person was not punishable as murder, reinforcing that the life of a slave was deemed disposable for the sake of the economic system.
Here is the incredible paradox. Even as Virginia was codifying this brutal, race-based economic system, the colonists were simultaneously championing the ideals of self-governance and liberty.
Yes. They established the Virginia General Assembly in July 1619.
Mere weeks before the first enslaved Africans arrived.
Just weeks. This is the oldest extant lawmaking body in North America. Its very existence meant power was immediately distributed beyond just the royal appointees.
And they were not passive about it. In 1635, the colonists demonstrated an incredible early agitation for local control when they arrested a royal governor, Sir John Harvey, for ignoring the General Assembly and sent him back to England against his will.
They believed they had the right to local representation that superseded the crown's immediate desires. And that tension over land, power, and class, it reached a breaking point in 1676.
With Bacon's Rebellion.
Right. Nathaniel Bacon, representing a large coalition of working-class followers, white and black, free and indentured, rebelled when Governor Berkeley refused to authorize attacks on native tribes to seize more western land.
They ended up burning Jamestown to the ground.
The entire capital. What's fascinating about Bacon's rebellion is its twisted legacy. It was a class revolt, but its ultimate effect was the exact opposite of uniting the poor masses.
Oh, so.
Well, Bacon's laws did restore some rights to poor white farmers, but they also sanctioned brutal attacks on native tribes and their enslavement. This rebellion essentially taught the colonial elite a terrible lesson. If you wanted to maintain power and prevent future class revolts, you had to drive a permanent wedge between the poor white population and the enslaved black population.
Which solidified the racial hierarchy for centuries to come.
Precisely. The Treaty of 1677, which followed, further stripped the tribes of autonomy and ceded land to the crown.
So by the mid-18th century, Virginia's wealthy planter class, educated in law and philosophy, was perfectly positioned to lead the resistance to British overreach.
Absolutely. Figures like Patrick Henry and Richard Henry Lee were vocal leaders against British taxes in the House of Burgesses.
And they were ready when the royal governor dissolved the General Assembly in 1774.
They just transitioned their governance through the Virginia Conventions. Virginia declared independence on May 15, 1776, and adopted George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, which historians recognize as a profound precursor.
It was basically the blueprint for Jefferson.
It was the direct blueprint for Thomas Jefferson's drafting of the National Declaration of Independence. That's how central Virginia's leadership was to the philosophical groundwork of the new nation. They formally adopted the designation Commonwealth around this time, emphasizing that government was instituted for the common good of the people.
And despite British raids led by, of all people, Benedict Arnold, Virginia became the stage for the final decisive action of the war.
The Siege of Yorktown in October 1781, culminating in General Cornwallis's surrender, which effectively secured colonial independence.
And Virginia immediately flexed its political muscle in the newly formed republic.
James Madison drafted the Virginia Plan, which advocated for a bicameral legislature based on population, ensuring Virginia's dominance, and then drafted the Bill of Rights in 1789.
But it's so important to remember that Virginia's political strength was structurally tied to its status as the largest slaveholding state.
Right, the Three-Fifths Compromise, which counted enslaved people as three-fifths of a person for representation, ensured Virginia maintained the largest bloc in the early House of Representatives.
So the dominance of the Virginia dynasty of early presidents was cemented by both these ideals of liberty and the institution of bondage.
It's the central contradiction, and by the time of the Civil War, those contradictions were just unsustainable. The sources reveal the staggering scale. Between 1790 and 1860, the slave population ballooned from 290,000 to over 490,000, roughly one-third of the state population. It was the most populous slave state in the U.S.
And the economy was evolving into something even more horrific. Decades of monoculture tobacco farming had severely degraded the soil, making large-scale agriculture less productive in the Tidewater region.
So as the federal government banned the importation of slaves, Virginia pivoted to an internal slave trade exporting human beings southward to feed the cotton boom in the Deep South. Slave breeding became a profitable yet utterly inhuman business.
Resistance and fear were constant forces. Failed slave uprisings, like Nat Turner's in 1831, only tightened the oppressive grip of the laws.
But the national tipping point occurred with John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry in 1859, intended to spark a mass insurrection. The highly polarized national response to his trial and execution convinced large swaths of both the North and South that the issue of slavery was fundamentally irreconcilable through political means.
So the election of Lincoln in 1860 triggered secession. Virginia voted to secede in April 1861, joining the Confederacy and making Richmond its capital.
But this decision was not unanimous, which is how Virginia literally split in two.
West Virginia.
Exactly. The northwestern counties, primarily small farms and mining towns with few slaves and strong Union loyalty, formed the Wheeling Convention. Their efforts led directly to the separation and recognition of West Virginia as a new state in 1863.
So the split really demonstrates that the identity of the Old Dominion was never monolithic. It was broken by this central conflict over slavery.
And Virginia paid the ultimate price, becoming the central battleground for the war. More Civil War battles are fought here than anywhere else in the nation, from the early clashes at Bull Run to the decisive moments at Fredericksburg and Lee's final surrender at Appomattox Courthouse in 1865.
And Richmond itself was decimated, abandoned and set on fire by retreating Confederate forces.
So after the war, Virginia was restored to the U.S. in 1870 under a new Reconstruction-era Constitution in 1868. This document brought vital progress. It guaranteed political and civil rights for African Americans and established the system of free public schools we know today.
This period also gave rise to a truly remarkable political movement, the Readjuster movement.
Formed in 1877, yeah. This was an opposition party that focused on economics over race. It successfully united black and white Virginians, working class, farmers, anyone seeking political reform, to oppose the massive state debt accrued during the war and Reconstruction.
And they wanted that money to go to schools instead.
Right, demanding that the money be spent on public schools and higher education. Their power was short-lived but impactful. They founded institutions like Virginia Tech and Virginia State University, and for a brief time, demonstrated that an interracial political coalition could govern successfully.
But the backlash was violent and absolute.
It was. The Readjuster Party fell apart after the 1883 Danville riot, a violent confrontation involving police and armed white supremacists.
And this provided the opportunity for white supremacists to seize control, leading directly to the implementation of Jim Crow laws and the drafting of the 1902 state constitution.
That constitution introduced a poll tax, literacy tests, and restrictive voter registration measures, which effectively disenfranchised most African Americans and about half of the poor white population.
It basically cemented an authoritarian, racially defined, one-party rule that would last for the next half-century.
And while that political oppression was being engineered, Virginia was industrializing rapidly. James Bonsack invented the tobacco cigarette rolling machine in 1880, transforming tobacco production into a major industrial operation centered in Richmond.
And at the same time, Newport News Shipbuilding, founded in 1886, became a huge military-industrial asset.
That shipyard was crucial for national power. It built 38 U.S. Navy warships between 1907 and 1923. During World War I, the Hampton Roads port of embarkation became the second largest U.S. port of embarkation.
So Virginia's economy, post-slavery, was now anchored by the military-industrial complex and mass-produced tobacco, but still operating under an intensely segregated system.
Moving into the mid-20th century, Virginia found itself yet again at the center of national conflict. The spark for the civil rights movement here was lit early on by a high school student, Barbara Rose Johns.
Right. She organized a strike in 1951 at her underfunded, segregated school in Prince Edward County.
In that case, when filed by the legal team of Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill, became one of the 5 cases that were bundled together into the landmark Supreme Court decision, Brown v. Board of Education in 1954.
And the white supremacist political establishment, led by Senator Harry F. Byrd and his powerful organization, responded with what became known as massive resistance.
This was not just rhetoric. It was a legislative strategy that passed laws cutting funding to any public school that attempted to integrate.
And the consequences were immediate and shocking. The most extreme example was Prince Edward County, which chose to shut down its entire public school system.
For 5 years.
5 years, rather than integrate. White children were sent to private academies, while black children were left without any formal education until a Supreme Court order finally forced the schools to reopen in 1964.
It just illustrates the depth of institutionalized segregation Virginia was willing to endure to maintain Jim Crow.
So federal intervention was necessary to dismantle the system.
The Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act were essential. And the 1967 Supreme Court case, Loving v. Virginia, struck down the state's ban on interracial marriage, a ban that was rooted in the state's 1924 Racial Integrity Act. A new state constitution, ratified in 1971, finally banned discrimination.
These changes paved the way for major political milestones, like the election of Douglas Wilder in 1989, who became the first African-American governor in the United States.
Meanwhile, the Cold War expansion permanently anchored the federal government in Northern Virginia. The CIA moved to Langley in 1961, and the Pentagon, built in Arlington during WWII, was struck tragically on 9/11.
And this created a permanent recession-proof economic engine tied to defense contracting, government payroll, and intelligence, the very foundation of modern Northern Virginia's unique wealth profile.
Yet contemporary Virginia still grapples with conflict. We see this with the debate over gun violence, where mass shootings at Virginia Tech in 2007 and Virginia Beach in 2019 led to significant gun control measures passed in 2020.
And the protests of 2020 finally led to the removal of many iconic Confederate statues, signaling a public reckoning with the state's polarizing historical symbols.
That history of conflict and the immense wealth disparity are fundamentally rooted in Virginia's geography. It's a land of extremes, located strategically between the mid-Atlantic and southeastern U.S.
Covering over 42,700 square miles, its boundaries are historically fraught. For instance, the border with Maryland and D.C. is defined by the low water mark of the Potomac River's south shore.
Right, which has been a constant source of disputes over water rights and jurisdiction.
And you mentioned the split city of Bristol earlier. That Tennessee border was famously disputed for over a century due to poor surveying in the late 18th century.
And the Supreme Court finally ruled in 1893 to keep the established, if meandering, boundary line, resulting in Bristol being literally divided in 2 states, running right through its main street.
But the truly defining feature is the water and the land formation around it, the Chesapeake Bay.
The bay is a drowned river valley of the ancient Susquehanna River, separating the mainland from the eastern shore. The major rivers, the Potomac, Rappahannock, York, and James, carve the landscape into 3 major peninsulas, known historically as the Necks.
It's incredible to think that this topography might have a cosmic origin. The Chesapeake Bay impact crater formed 35 million years ago by a bolide.
Yeah, it's believed to explain why the region experiences earthquakes and why certain areas are experiencing land subsidence, a geographic time bomb buried beneath the coast.
This creates 5 distinct physiographic regions running east to west, each with its own economic and political characteristics.
Starting at the coast, we have the Tidewater. This is the coastal plain, including the eastern shore and barrier islands like Chincoteague. Historically, this was the center of colonial life and tobacco growing.
But today, it is highly vulnerable to erosion and sea level rise, which is already displacing coastal communities.
Moving inland, we find the Piedmont, the foothills region, characterized by sedimentary and igneous rock and heavy clay soil. This region transitions from suburban density near D.C. down to more rural areas and is where much of the state's population resides outside of Northern Virginia.
West of the Piedmont, we encounter the magnificent Blue Ridge Mountains.
Home to the highest points, including Mount Rogers at 5,729 feet. The name comes from the signature blue haze, which is actually a natural phenomenon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the isoprene released by the dense oak forests interacting with the atmosphere. It's a powerful reminder of the state's environmental richness.
And beyond the Blue Ridge
Is the Ridge and Valley province, a landscape of carbonate rock featuring the incredibly fertile Shenandoah Valley. This area was crucial during the Civil War for its agricultural output.
And finally, in the southwest corner.
You have the Cumberland Plateau Mountains, a rougher, more isolated terrain where rivers flow northwest into the Ohio River Basin. This region is historically tied to coal and mining, separating it geographically and economically from the rest of the Commonwealth.
That extensive limestone geology in the Ridge and Valley region has created an immense underground world. Virginia boasts over 4,000 limestone caves.
And 10 of which are open for commercial tourism, including the famous Luray Caverns. We can't forget the Natural Bridge either. The geology confirms that this iconic landmark is actually the remnant roof of a collapsed cave system.
Wow.
It shows how the forces of underground water have fundamentally carved the state's visible structures.
However, the underground also holds significant mineral wealth and policy conflict. Coal mining remains active in the three mountainous regions. But here's the curious policy detail. Virginia holds the largest known deposits of uranium in the U.S. at Coles Hill.
And despite the enormous potential economic windfall, Virginia has had a ban on uranium mining since 1982.
That's a huge policy choice.
It is. It's a monumental policy choice, prioritizing environmental protection and public health concerns over a major financial resource. It demonstrates a long-standing environmental focus, even if that focus sometimes conflicts with the economic drivers in the state's western regions.
So Virginia's climate is largely humid subtropical in the east, which transitions to humid continental west of the Blue Ridge.
Right. They see seasonal extremes, with average lows of 25 degrees air in January and highs of 86 degrees air in July, averaging over 43 inches of annual precipitation. The hazards are real. They experience 35 to 45 days of thunderstorms annually.
But the deadliest natural disaster was inland Hurricane Camille in 1969.
A terrible event. The storm stalled over the mountains, dumping massive amounts of rain, leading to catastrophic flash flooding that killed over 150 people, primarily in Nelson County.
And the region is susceptible to major snow events, often exacerbated by the geography. The 2016 blizzard, often linked to a phenomenon called cold air damming caused by the Appalachians, delivered the state's highest recorded one-day snowfall, 36.6 inches near Bluemont.
Environmentally, there are profound modern challenges, some of which are tied to systemic history. Studies show that urban heat islands areas with significantly higher temperatures are directly linked to historic redlining practices.
So marginalized neighborhoods, often black neighborhoods, face greater heat stress and subsequent health risks today.
Exactly. That connection between historical housing discrimination and modern environmental inequity is striking. It underscores how deeply embedded these systemic issues are.
Now, on a more positive environmental note, air quality has improved significantly since 1998, primarily due to the mandated closing and conversion of coal power plants.
And Virginia is now showing an aggressive policy move, aiming for 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050.
But there's a tension there, isn't there?
A huge tension. Achieving that 100% carbon-free goal by 2050 while simultaneously powering Northern Virginia's massive data center alley, which we will get to shortly, is going to be a titanic challenge. Those data centers require immense, consistent power, placing enormous strain on the state's grid and its ability to transition effectively to renewables.
It's a fundamental conflict between economic identity and environmental mandate.
The natural landscape is still heavily forested, covering 62% of the state, primarily hardwood. The dogwood is designated as both the state tree and flower.
But invasive species pose a major threat.
They do. The combination of spongy moth infestations and chestnut blight has allowed non-native species, particularly the aggressive tree of heaven, to flourish. This changes the fundamental character of the eastern forest ecosystems.
On the animal front, white-tailed deer have made a dramatic comeback, recovering from a low of 25,000 in the 1930s to over 1 million now.
And native carnivorans include black bears, with a healthy population of 5,000 to 6,000, as well as bobcats and coyotes. And for a fun fact you can take with you,
Go on.
the Virginia big-eared bat is the state mammal, but the Virginia opossum holds the unique distinction of being the only marsupial native to the United States and Canada.
The Chesapeake Bay wildlife is central to the state's identity and economy. The bay hosts approximately 350 species of fish and shellfish.
The bay anchovy is the most abundant finfish, but the invasive blue catfish is a major concern, consuming native species at an alarming rate.
And the blue crab population, a historically critical resource, is struggling.
It is. The latest 2025 estimates note the population is distressingly low, clocking in at 238 million. Conversely, conservation and policy efforts have helped the oyster harvest rebound significantly. The 2022-2023 season was the largest oyster harvest in 35 years.
So that shows that careful stewardship can yield success even in a fragile ecosystem.
It does. And the state fish is the brook trout, thriving in the higher elevation streams.
So if we synthesize this, Virginia's physical landscape supports two diametrically opposed economies. Its past was rooted in monoculture agriculture. Its present is defined by federal power and digital infrastructure, creating a vast chasm in wealth.
The income statistics illustrate the stark divide between the two Virginias. The statewide median household income is $89,931, making it the 11th highest in the U.S. But that average hides the extreme concentrations of wealth.
Loudoun County in Northern Virginia doesn't just rank high, it consistently has the highest median household income in the entire nation.
It's incredible. And the fact is, 18 of the 100 highest income counties in the entire U.S. are clustered in Northern Virginia. This is an unparalleled concentration of wealth.
And you contrast that with the pockets of high poverty like Montgomery County near Blacksburg, which has the highest poverty rate in the state at 28.5%.
Right. While the state's Gini index shows slightly less overall income inequality than the national average, the middle class is reportedly smaller than in most states, highlighting that concentrated wealth at the very top is a driving force.
We also have to note Virginia's labor laws. It has been a right-to-work state since 1947 and an employment-at-will state since 1906.
And while it offers strong protections against certain forms of discrimination, the low-tipped employee minimum wage, stuck at $2.13, is a significant negative factor for the lower-income workforce.
So where does all this wealth come from? The federal government.
The federal government is the state's primary economic stabilizer. Government agencies directly employ a huge contingent of the state workforce, nearly 715,000 individuals, or about 17% of all workers.
And the financial spigot for defense and operations runs directly through Virginia. It receives 12% of all U.S. federal procurement money.
Second only to California. This translates into hundreds of billions of dollars channeled into defense contracting and military infrastructure.
This is bolstered by the physical military presence. Virginia hosts 27 military bases, spanning 270,000 acres.
And Naval Station Norfolk is uniquely significant. It's the world's largest naval base, and crucially, the only NATO station located on U.S. soil, cementing Hampton Roads as a global defense asset.
And beyond the active service members, Virginia has the second highest concentration of veterans in the country, at 9.7% of the total population.
This entrenched military government contracting infrastructure is precisely what makes Northern Virginia's economy so robust and resilient, often decoupled from national economic downturns.
And complementing the government sector is the private high-tech industry.
Virginia has the third highest concentration of technology workers in the U.S., accounting for over 450,000 jobs. These are high-paying jobs with median salaries often approaching six figures.
And this industry is physically rooted in Northern Virginia's geography. Loudoun County became the world's largest data center market in 2016, earning the moniker Data Center Alley.
We're not just talking about a few server farms. This relatively small geographic region handles an astonishing 1/3 of all global internet traffic.
A third.
It is the physical backbone of the digital world. The scale of this infrastructure is staggering, and it has profound implications. As we mentioned, the energy consumption for this data center alley is immense, creating a direct conflict with the state's 100% carbon-free electricity goal.
And this region drives so much economic output that at one point computer chips were actually the state's highest grossing export back in 2006.
Today, major companies like Amazon, with its HQ2 in Crystal City, and Google and Reston have solidified the Dulles Technology Corridor's dominance. This reliance on high-tech infrastructure gives Virginia the second fastest average internet speed nationwide, and is why CNBC recently ranked Virginia as the top state for business in 2024.
And yet, despite all this high-tech focus, we have to remember that agriculture remains the single largest industry in the state, supporting over 490,000 jobs.
That's right. Approximately 30% of the land, totaling 7.7 million acres, is still farmland.
And the sources show a shift in primary crops. While tobacco production still ranks third nationally, soybeans were actually the most profitable crop in 2022.
It demonstrates how agriculture has diversified away from the historical colonial cash crop while still maintaining roots in it. Seafood is also a critical component of the economy. Virginia is the country's third largest seafood producer, specializing in sea scallops, oysters, and Chesapeake blue crabs.
Then there are the niche but culturally significant specialty goods. Virginia has the seventh highest number of wineries in the nation, producing 1.1 million cases annually.
Particularly along the Northern Neck and in the Blue Ridge foothills. And the absolute icon of Virginia cuisine, Smithfield ham, which is legally protected and can only be produced in the town of Smithfield, ensuring its authenticity.
This rapid economic expansion of the past few decades, fueled by federal jobs and tech growth, has radically transformed Virginia's demographic profile.
About 12% of residents were born outside the U.S. The influx is diverse. The top foreign birth country is El Salvador, followed closely by India and Mexico. This rapid growth caused the Hispanic population to surge by 92% between 2000 and 2010.
Northern Virginia is also home to large communities of Vietnamese Americans, stemming from the post-Vietnam War era, and Korean Americans.
Right. Hampton Roads specifically has about 45,000 Filipino Americans due to the massive naval presence.
But underneath these modern shifts lies a deep historical challenge to Native American identity.
It does. Tribal membership and recognition were complicated for decades by the state's policy of pencil genocide.
Explain that.
It was a deliberate effort implemented through state laws to intentionally categorize Native Americans and blacks together on official records. This was done to undermine tribal distinctiveness and further the goals of racial segregation.
Today there is progress. Virginia recognizes 11 tribes, and 7 of those now have federal recognition, including the Pamunkey and Mattapony.
The fight for recognition has been central to reclaiming their distinct historical narrative, and the Mattapony and Pamunkey tribes continue an ancient tradition, presenting the governor with a tribute of deer on Thanksgiving, honoring colonial treaties dating back to 1677.
Virginia's political landscape is a complex artifact of its history, resulting in highly unique governmental structures that often defy national norms.
The legislative body, the bicameral Virginia General Assembly, remains the oldest continuous lawmaking body in North America. They maintain very short regular sessions, either 48 or 60 days, but often rely on hybrid special sessions to complete complex work.
The executive branch, however, is structurally limited by the state constitution. Virginia is the only state in the nation where governors are constitutionally prohibited from serving consecutive terms.
They can run again later, but never back-to-back.
That's just fascinating.
This institutionalized distrust of centralized executive power, hearkening back to the motto, Sic Semper Tyrannis, also extends to the judiciary. Unlike the federal system where governors appoint judges, Virginia's judges and Supreme Court justices are elected by a majority vote in both the House and Senate. The governor has zero input.
So the legislature is traditionally the most powerful branch of government in the Commonwealth.
By far.
Another administrative oddity that often confuses outsiders is Virginia's method of treating its 95 counties and 38 independent cities as approximate equals.
This structure is nearly unique to Virginia. Only 3 other independent cities exist elsewhere in the U.S.
And this structure dates back to the colonial period, but we have to look at its recent history to understand its political implications.
Right. Our sources show that some areas, like the city of Pocasson, reincorporated specifically in the 1970s as a measure to try and preserve racial segregation during the desegregation era by preventing county-wide integration mandates.
It shows how local administrative structures were historically manipulated for political ends. This also drives persistent annexation disputes between cities and counties, further complicating regional governance and resource distribution.
Speaking of complex governance, let's look at the roads. The Byrd Road Act of 1932 placed VDOT, the Virginia Department of Transportation, in control of most of Virginia's roads. VDOT operates 57,867 miles of highway.
The third largest state highway system in the entire country.
And the consequence of this centralized control is immense. It means that most localities do not manage their own infrastructure funding or planning, relying instead on VDOT, a state entity, to prioritize local road construction and maintenance.
Which can lead to significant friction over funding allocation, especially between the heavily populated North and the rural South.
And this centralized system struggles mightily with the D.C. traffic nightmare. The Washington metropolitan area, which includes Northern Virginia, has the second worst traffic congestion rate among U.S. cities. The average commute time is 28.7 minutes, ranking 8th longest nationwide.
It's a huge drain on economic productivity and quality of life in the North. But despite the reliance on cars, Virginia is also making strides in mass transit. The state hit peak car usage before 2000.
Washington Metro accounts for over 62% of Virginia's public transit trips. Furthermore, Amtrak ridership has surpassed pre-pandemic levels, leading the state to finalize a landmark $3.7 billion deal in 2021 to purchase hundreds of miles of track from CSX for future expansion of passenger rail service.
Which shows a long-term commitment to reducing that crippling traffic reliance. Virginia's political journey in the last 70 years is perhaps the most dramatic shift of any state.
For decades, until the 1970s, it was a conservative, racially defined, one-party state dominated by the powerful Byrd Organization, named after Senator Harry F. Byrd.
And the Byrd Organization maintained its power through authoritarian means. They used malapportionment drawing legislative districts to give massive voting power to sparsely populated conservative rural areas,
while simultaneously employing the restrictive Jim Crow mechanisms we discussed, like the poll tax and literacy tests. And this was brutally effective. Between 1905 and 1948, voter turnout was often below 10%.
10%.
It essentially guaranteed the organization's control and perpetuated segregation and white rule.
It took federal intervention to break this chokehold.
It did. Federal courts, spurred by the Civil Rights Movement and the Voting Rights Act of the 1960s, finally ended malapportionment and forced the dismantling of the restrictive voter registration laws.
But the legacy of Jim Crow endured. The lifetime ban on felony voting, a provision of the 1902 Constitution, meant that by 2016, up to 20% of African Americans were permanently disenfranchised.
And Governor Terry McAuliffe finally used executive power to restore rights to over 200,000 ex-felons in 2016. This shift in voter access contributed to Virginia moving from being the second most difficult state to vote in to the 12th easiest in 2020.
This demographic and legal shift completely realigned the political map. Virginia voted reliably Republican in 10 consecutive presidential elections from 1968 through 2004.
But the growth of urban and suburban Northern Virginia, driven by that high-tech federal money, tipped the scales. Since 2008, Virginia has reliably voted Democratic, becoming the only former Confederate state to vote Democratic in both the 2016 and 2024 presidential elections.
Interestingly, Virginia was ranked as having the most gerrymandered state legislature in 2018.
Which demonstrates how hard the remaining power structure fought to maintain control. However, federal courts intervened, and a 2020 referendum successfully moved redistricting control to an independent commission, signaling a long-term commitment to fairer representation.
Yet, for all its movement toward the Democratic column nationally, Virginia maintains a contrarian streak, famously electing governors of the opposite party from the sitting U.S. president in 11 of the last 12 contests.
It is a state determined not to let any one party or leader feel too comfortable, perhaps rooted in that deep historical distrust of centralized power.
Virginia's culture is defined by its regional variations, blending Deep South traditions with Appalachian influences and modern Mid-Atlantic cosmopolitanism. We've mentioned the neoclassical architecture favored by Thomas Jefferson, which defines the state's historical aesthetic.
Architecturally and historically, you have massive open-air museums like Colonial Williamsburg, which draws millions. But culturally, the presence of the Wolf Trap National Park for the performing arts is a unique commitment.
It is the only national park in the U.S. dedicated as a performing arts center,
which underscores the state's emphasis on public arts and accessible culture. Musically, Virginia is famous for being a birthplace of old-time string and bluegrass, producing influential figures like the Carter family and the Stanley Brothers from the Southwest.
But its African-American heritage contributed profoundly to gospel, blues, and jazz, giving us icons like Ella Fitzgerald and Pearl Bailey from Newport News.
And the state continues to produce modern stars across genres, from Dave Matthews to Missy Elliott and Pharrell Williams.
The regional dialects are a fascinating lens into the past. The Appalachian accent, influenced by Scottish and Irish immigrants, is quite distinct from the non-rhotic Piedmont dialect,
where car sounds like ka.
Exactly. But the most unique is the English spoken on Tangier Island in the Chesapeake Bay, which, due to its isolation, is said to retain elements of early modern English dating back to the 17th century.
And we see culture reflected in unique traditions. The annual Chincoteague pony penning is famous globally, where feral ponies swim across the channel. And of course, the Thanksgiving tradition of the Mattapony and Pamunkey tribes, presenting a deer tribute to the governor.
Honoring colonial treaties dating all the way back to 1677 is a profound statement on enduring cultural presence and historical memory.
Virginia consistently ranks high in education, usually within the top 5 states on the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Its public K-12 schools are operated by counties and cities, supplemented by highly selective institutions.
The Governor's Schools program for gifted students is nationally recognized. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, part of that system, was ranked as the top-rated high school in the entire country in 2022.
Overall, the state ranks 8th highest nationally for the percentage of residents with a bachelor's degree or higher at 41.5%.
The higher education landscape is stacked with high performers. Highly ranked public universities include the University of Virginia, third nationally among publics, and William & Mary, 13th. Virginia State University is one of 5 historically black colleges and universities.
However, the state's history of segregation still impacts its schools. Despite legal integration decades ago, 7% of public schools were rated as intensely segregated in 2019, a number that has actually risen since 1989.
So while large countywide school districts help mitigate funding gaps, racial segregation persists, often reflecting ongoing housing patterns.
On the positive side, for access and equity, the University of Virginia guarantees full tuition scholarships to all in-state students whose families earn $80,000 or less, which is a major commitment to affordability.
And the state made community college free for most low- and middle-income students in 2021, focusing on workforce training.
Virginia generally ranks well for health outcomes, placing 15th overall as of 2024, partly due to the expansion of Medicare in 2019, which reduced the rate of uninsured Virginians.
But the racial disparities in health are alarming and directly linked to the systemic issues we've discussed. African Americans have a life expectancy 4 years less than whites.
And most distressing is the maternal health crisis. African American mothers are 3 times more likely to die while giving birth than white mothers, pointing to profound systemic failures within the healthcare system.
The state is also contending with the national deaths of despair trend. Mortality rates among white middle-class Virginians are increasing due to drug overdose, alcohol poisoning, and suicide.
Virginia was an early adopter of preventative measures, becoming the first state to mandate the HPV vaccine for girls back in 2008.
And obesity is a major public health concern, with 32.2% of adults classified as obese. On the policy side, Virginia was one of the first states to ban smoking in bars and restaurants in 2010, which has helped lower the rate of tobacco smokers, though e-cigarette use remains a challenge.
Finally, we arrive at Virginia's most curious, modern anomaly.
It is the most populous U.S. state without a single major professional sports league franchise.
It's genuinely shocking for a state of 8.8 million people and immense economic power. The reasons are geographic and political. There is no single dominant market city, and the proximity to major teams in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore siphons off fan bases.
And more recently, the political reluctance to use public funds for stadiums has been evident. A 2023 proposal to move the Washington Wizards and Capitals to Alexandria was canceled after strong opposition in the state Senate,
which reflects a historical aversion to large-scale corporate subsidies. Consequently, college sports dominate the cultural landscape. The rivalries between the Virginia Cavaliers and the Virginia Tech Hokies attract the strongest following, creating massive statewide spectacles that replace the professional void.
And while the state may lack major franchises, it continues to produce world-class athletes.
Absolutely. Virginia is the home state of Gabby Douglas, the first African-American to win gymnastics individual all-around gold, and Noah Lyles, the 100-meter gold winner at the 2024 Olympics. The talent is there. The infrastructure is simply focused elsewhere.
We've taken a comprehensive journey through the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have traced its identity from the brutal beginnings of Jamestown and the codification of race-based slavery through its indispensable role in the founding and the agonizing physical and political split of the Civil War.
Virginia is fundamentally a state of deep historical gravity and radical modern dynamism. We've seen how geography dictates economy, creating the immense, centralized wealth of Northern Virginia's Data Center Alley, powered by federal spending, contrasted sharply with pockets of high poverty and the isolated industrial legacies of the Appalachian and agricultural regions.
And crucially, the very structure of the Commonwealth, from the unique independent cities to the strong legislator-dominant government, is a testament to this layered history and its deep-seated contradictions.
That brings us back one final time to Virginia's motto, Sic semper tyrannis. We've discussed this state's commitment to liberty and its systemic opposition to concentrated power.
So consider this. This ingrained, institutionalized distrust is perhaps best exemplified by the governor's unique, lifelong constitutional ban on serving consecutive terms.
How does this structural safeguard against tyranny, this mandatory disruption of executive continuity, shape the state's ability to govern itself today, especially when facing massive long-term policy challenges like climate change and managing the immense power demands of Data Center Alley? It forces Virginia to continually reinvent its executive vision, a structural paradox that is deeply embedded in the Old Dominion.